All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Thrive After Sports podcast. If you're listening on the Power of Story, thank you for tuning in there as well. I'm back with another great episode. I'm excited to have this guest on today. We were connected about a month or so ago, and it's funny because over the past few weeks, we've had like 3 or 4 people trying to introduce us, like, hey, you two need to connect. And I'm like, we're already connected. We're already on it. So that just goes to show you how parallel our missions are. And I'm excited to be here today with Dr. Daniel Zimet, the lead investigator of the athlete transition study. And we're going to take a deep dive today into exactly what that is. But Dr. Zimet, thank you for being here today. Appreciate you spending some time.
Well, it's a real pleasure. And I appreciate all the work that you've already done on this extremely important subject, which is the retirement experiences and after sport life of elite athletes. And it's just a real pleasure to be able to meet with you finally. Thank you for allowing me to come on your program.
Yes, sir. It's my pleasure. And why don't we just give listeners a little bit of a background before we get into the study? Can you just tell us a little bit about your career and kind of everything leading up to this point for you even becoming the lead investigator on this athlete transition study?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a licensed psychologist. I do a lot of work with adolescents, young adults, sports, relationships, counseling. That's a majority of what I do. I'm also a CMPC or sports psychologist. So I do a fair amount of work with athletes and teams. I have a private practice in Columbia, Maryland. I'm an athlete myself, sort of travel soccer player, skateboarder, all sport guy when I was younger. Never played anything collegiately, but I've competed on the professional tour as a handball player. And I have 33 national titles in handball. So I continue to compete in that. And I just have a deep respect for the lives of athletes, having worked with them for about 20 years. The project came together mostly because of the passion of the athletes who I work with, the real compassion I feel for them in the transition process, which is very difficult for many. And a number of my colleagues volunteered their time to join me in creating the research project to help address a need that has really, in my opinion, not received the attention that it deserves, which is the overarching experiences of what the transition out of elite sport is like for athletes, how they manage to get through it, and then what life looks like afterwards. You know, in my opinion, many of them thrive, but it's a difficult experience getting there. Many are unprepared for it. So all of us got together and said, this is something that really needs and deserves to be done. And we've put 3 years into it, and we're really hoping to keep some momentum going.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I appreciate you giving a little background on yourself and also what led up to the study. And one of the things you touched on, just the fact that not a lot of attention has been put on athlete transition over the years. That's one of the things I appreciated the most about what you and your team are doing when we first connected, is because you've come up with a game plan that's very organized. And I'd like to get into that a little bit because, you know, I started doing this work in 2018, and Miriam Glaze, who you're familiar with, she's been a great ally of mine in terms of us coming together and supporting athletes in transition. And there are many others who have popped up over the years as well. One of the things, like I said, I appreciated about the work you're doing is that there's a long-term vision with the study in terms of how you're looking to use this data. So can you talk a little bit about the long-term vision that you and your team are planning with this athlete transition study?
Absolutely. Elite athletes in retirement are a very unique population. The only group that I can think that is in any way comparable are combat veterans, where you have a very intense career that occurs very early in your life and is extremely consuming. And you retire from that at a pretty early age. For athletes, it's often in their 20s, even if they're extremely successful, maybe late 20s or early 30s. For combat veterans, it might be a little bit after that, but maybe not much. That leaves you an incredibly long time in quote unquote retirement. And rarely do you end up getting enough money from that experience to retire on. And even if you do, what kind of meaning are you going to make for the rest of your life? So that's what makes this population, I think, unique and also in need of our attention, because athletes leave sport typically under aware of what they really should be doing with their life thereafter. There's been very little conversation, preparation, or training that occurs. In fact, I found many athletes are dissuaded from preparing themselves for life after sport. And they just vanish off of the other end of the conveyor belt. People pay such close attention to athletes while they're in their prime and even in their development, but there's almost nothing once they end up leaving the field of play. And the general attitude from the stakeholders in sport, I think, is they need to move on to winning the next game and to fielding the roster for the next season. They're really not thinking about the athletes who are discharged off of the other end. And I think many fans believe that athletes generally leave their sport happy, good looking, healthy, sort of the Adonis with a lot of money in the bank and, huge social following, and they're just going to be fine. And that is almost never true. It is not never true, but almost never true. So the long-term objective of our study is to figure out a number of different questions that, believe it or not, have never been answered to any satisfaction, which is what actually happens to athletes, not just some athletes, but all athletes in the transition process. Does how they retire matter? What kind of health factors end up coming to play? How bad do things get? And in what way do they struggle? And when do they end up being able to adapt or transition through that until they adjust to life after sport? How long does that take and what has to occur? So that's the bulk of what we're trying to answer. And the main objective of that data is to really bring the people who hold the purse strings, little tongue twister there, and would be able to fund programming to get their attention, because we have individual athletes who are making pleas for the need of this kind of work. A recent example of that is Michael Phelps' documentary, The Weight of Gold, and other athletes who have come out and say, this is extremely hard, extremely hard. We need the people who really hold the purse strings to be aware of the scope of the problem. And that really hasn't happened. And then we also want to understand the programs that are already in place. Are they being utilized? How do people experience them? How do the support systems get accessed by athletes? Do they find them supportive? Who ends up really doing most of the carrying of supporting athletes through the transition? Our experience, not through the research, but just through my observation, is it's really family and spouses that end up helping athletes. They kind of go back home and they're largely ignored. And I can understand why. Coaches need to win their games. People who own teams want to bring fans into the stadium. But in my opinion, there's enough resource that it would not really require that much to do what's necessary. We just need to know what that is, who needs the help, and our job is to explain why that's important. That's what the research is for.
One of the things I love most about what you shared was how you talked about the parallels between the military and athletics. And that's something that I talk about in my book. And I think that really paints the picture of what the experience is like. And then you also went into athletic departments. And it's funny because when I first graduated from college, I was bitter and angry towards the athletic departments and coaches, feeling like, they should have done a better job of helping me prepare. And it took a few years for me to mature and realize exactly what you said. That's not their job. Their job is to win games and focus on the current athletes. And so I just think it's great that we have people like yourself who are now coming to the table and not only offering services like, many others do, but you're saying, okay, we're going to put together some data. We're going to get some evidence. Because to be transparent with you, Dr. Zimet, over the years, I've seen surveys and questionnaires and polls and different things come out but they're not as in depth as what you and your team have put together. And that's another thing that I appreciated about it, because you're asking very in depth questions, and the data that you're gathering, it's almost like you can't argue against it. And I feel that, and I just want to, if you're listening to this or watching this video, everyone just take a quick pause and go visit athletetransitionstudy.com. Correct? Is that the correct website address? Okay. Just take a visit. Make sure you take the study and just fill out the questions, because the more people that we have signed up for this, the more we're going to be able to encourage the people, like Dr. Zimet said, the people who do hold the purse strings, to be able to put resources towards this type of work. And you'll see while you're taking the questionnaire and filling out the study that these are very thoughtful questions. And so that actually kind of leads me to my next question. I was going to ask you, I know you've done tons of research, but how did you go about formulating the type of questions that you wanted to ask?
Well, it was actually a very difficult process. It took us over 2 years to develop the questionnaires that are in the survey. We're looking at both retired athletes, so individuals who played sport at an elite level, which we describe as collegiate or higher, or its equivalent for your sport, because not every sport goes through the collegiate pathway, and international sports are not often collegiate pathway. And we're also asking people who never played sport at the elite level, because we're looking for a normative population to compare athletes to. What makes the survey unique, and I think so complex, is that we're not just looking at one sport. We're looking at every sport that's been played at the elite level, from archery to wrestling, and everything in between. We are looking at men and women. We're looking at adaptive sports, so Paralympians. We're wanting to really see the broadest possible swath of athletes. No matter how long you've been retired, we want you to take the survey. And the survey itself looks at a very wide array of issues. It looks very closely at the transition process from a global health standpoint. And then we look very specifically at those issues for people's current functioning. So we look at cognitive health, occupational, social, behavioral. We look at issues like pain, history of trauma, spirituality, sleep. We want to know about people's mental health, their emotional intelligence. We want to hear about how people thrive. So there's positive psychology questions in there. And we want to understand about the systems that people either participated or did not participate in supporting their transition out of sport, whether they got mental health services. We want to know about their background. We are looking at a very wide array of issues. Part of why this hasn't really been done before is because of the advantages we have with modern survey techniques. There's a lot of logic embedded in these questionnaires. So it allows people to bypass or skip questions that are not directly relevant to their experience. And that's how we can ask upwards of 300 questions, but have it only take about 23 minutes for people to do the sport questionnaire, because you only get a fraction of those questions. You only get the ones that are relevant to you.
And I really want people to take away from this two things as you're looking at the survey and filling out the survey. First of all, you're going to be able to better understand yourself and your own experience. I know because of the depth of the questions I did, that was my experience. And it was, I can imagine if I had taken it, if the survey was around when I was first really struggling through the transition, how impactful it would have been for me just to be like, oh, okay, so I'm not crazy. Like someone understands this experience, and it's not just something, it's not a Taj thing that I'm experiencing. This is across the board with any athlete from any background. And then the other part of it that I want people to take away is that by taking the survey, like we briefly touched on earlier, you are literally helping raise awareness and providing more data to be able to prevent future athletes from going through this, and also helping yourself in the process. So, you know, it covers many different areas. Like you said, Dr. Zimet, that's why it's so in depth. You've thought about a full scope of what an athlete experiences from A to Z, which I think is why the questions are so impactful. I know you have some targets in mind that you shared with me. number one, what are some of the targets that you're looking to reach, and why did you set those targets? Because I know that a certain amount of people taking the survey equals a certain amount of data that becomes more impactful when you're presenting it to someone else. So what are the targets and how did you come up with them? And then I know this is a three-part question, but what happens when the targets are reached? What's the next steps once you hit the targets?
Yeah. So, there's a number of things that I want to touch on what you just said. This is a great way to contribute to the future athletes retiring from sport so that they can have a better experience than what athletes are having today or 10 years ago. If you go to the website, which is where the survey is located, you'll also find a number of different pages of resources for athletes. There's summaries of the research that's already been conducted, but the resource page lists hundreds of different available opportunities for retiring athletes to get connected with the services that they can use, from mental health to general support systems and the recognition of other people. Like you had said, Taj, it's nice to know you're not alone. So there's actually quite a few support systems out there. Athletes for Care is one of them that I've worked with periodically. There's pain clinics, there's legal supports, and we list all of those with links so athletes can go in and find them. You asked about targets and I think what we intend to do with the data. The target is, you got to be ambitious. I would like to see no less than 100 athletes in each cell that we're really wanting to learn about. So what does that mean? It means we need a fairly diverse pool. So as an example, there's a lot of positions in football. We want to be able to compare linemen to special teams, to position players, and to understand differential outcomes for those people. We want to be able to know how someone who played football in high school differs from someone who also played in college, who also played in the pros, who played for 1 year versus 5 years versus 10 years. In order to do that, we need thousands of people who've played football. And that's just one of the 50 sports that we identify as being played at the elite level. My ambition, since there are millions of retired elite athletes in the US alone, is to get somewhere on the order of 100,000 athletes multinationally to take the questionnaire so that we can fill a lot of these areas and, most importantly, feel as though we're representing everybody. What I would really hate to see is if we had a very robust data pool, but for a very small population. And I'll give you an example of that. Right now, we have about 40 soccer players who've taken the questionnaire. Dr. David McDuff, who's a sports psychiatrist, his daughter played elite level soccer, and she kindly did what I'm going to ask your listeners to do, which is emailed all of her friends or Facebook or whatever social media people are using now and said, hey, this is the questionnaire athlete transition study. Would you guys do this for me? Within the next 3 or 4 days, we got 30 people to take the questionnaire. So right now, 30 of our 40 soccer players are ex-teammates or friends of Dr. McDuff's daughter. We really appreciate their participation, but I don't know how representative they are of anybody else other than that small group. So we need a very wide dispersal because we need to really get a stratified look that covers everybody because we want to speak for every voice. So my ambitions are actually very big. I'm hoping for 100,000 plus participants of the questionnaire. And honestly, all of the people who are invested in this are volunteers. No one is making any money. There's no grant money. We haven't been asked to do this by any organization. These are just applied sports psychologists and athletes who participated, particularly Corey Boatman from Syracuse, in educating us about the athlete experience. All of us have volunteered to put this together. Our only investment is in the athletes themselves. And we're not on a timeline. It's not like our grant money runs out in 1 year. we're going to do this as long as we have to get the data that we need.
Yeah, I love the ambitious goals. I mean, I think that's the only way to get anything done. I love the goal of 100,000. And once again, we just want to encourage everybody to go to athletetransitionstudy.com right now and take the quiz, take the survey, and not only take the survey, but send it out and share it out with people. Another thing too, while you guys are on the website, remember what Dr. Zimet said. This is a hub too. It's not just a place you go to take a survey. There are resources on there. There are stories of other athletes. I know I'm lagging a little bit, but I need to make sure I get you my info. And so I can be listed on there as a resource as well. So who knows, by the time you guys listen to this, I may be up on the website also. But I want to go back to kind of just the target, just so we can encourage everyone why this is important. So let's just say you hit your goal of 100,000, and what happens next? What are the next steps once you hit your goal? Who are you looking? I know you briefly touched on it, but I want to just really paint the picture for people how important this really is. So, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, so this is the other side of the story. So part of it is creating a unequivocal statistical data set that people who are in your area or other athletes can turn to and say, this is my story and why you should pay attention, because individual stories really pull on people's heartstrings. But then they'll also have science to be able to talk about the scope of the problem and why it's not just, and this is a cynical view that I will occasionally hear from people who are heavily invested in the status quo. They will say, that's great that we have a few athletes who have had this problem. I'm really sorry to hear that. They are the exception. They're not the rule. So there's a few athletes that have struggled, but do we really know what the scope of the problem is? And unfortunately, the answer to that right now is no. So you'll be able to really speak to the breadth. And the way that we plan on leveraging the data is to, for instance, do podcasts like this, provide access to data for people who are involved in research. We will do that research as well. We will publish research articles. We will talk to media outlets. We will speak to anyone with ears to listen about what our findings look like. I intend to reach out to the governing bodies of sports who we get a large enough response from and share with them what we learn. We'll be able to put together something of a template of data. And so I'll be able to send that information to the governing body for badminton and share with them how people who what the retirement experience and outcomes with our data look like for badminton and what their athletes are saying, how their athletes compare to other sports, how they compare to people who didn't play sports, what kind of support systems were utilized, all the things that I discussed. And they can hopefully talk with us about how to utilize that information to do a better job. For many of these things, it's not necessarily about spending a lot of money. It's having knowledge that is provided in a targeted way to the athletes who you know are potentially going to have issues, accessing them early and knowing what information they need in order to help bridge that gap between leaving your sport and being adjusted to life thereafter. So we intend on providing that data to each individual sport and their governing bodies. And hopefully in the process, we'll get the attention of larger media sources. And hopefully you'll get to watch me on Oprah or hear me on NPR one day.
That's right. That's right. Hey, you're speaking it into existence. You know, some people might laugh at that as a joke, but I don't see why not. You know, I think the work is that important, and you're really putting the effort in. You and your team are putting the effort in to make it happen. So, Dr. Zimet, we could easily keep this conversation going. I want to make sure I'm being respectful of your time. Of course, I want to point people in the direction of how they can go take the survey and how they can connect with you or reach out if they have questions or if they want to get you on their podcast. But before we do that, isn't anything that we haven't covered yet? Anything you think is important for people to know about the study or just in general? Anything that you want to share right now before we start winding down a little bit?
Well, I think that people who are likely to listen to you already share our passion and understanding of the need. So I don't know that I need to say anything more about that, because I think anyone who has been involved in sports knows athletes who have gone through a very difficult transition. So having that awareness, I'm going to implore you to put that into action. I know that I care very deeply about many issues that I don't translate into action. I want rhinos to live forever, but I can't remember if I donated money to the National Wildlife Foundation. Um, and so the survey takes 23 minutes on average. That's what I'm asking you to do. And it's just invaluable, your participation in it. Each one of your surveys helps. And if you do that and you still feel passionate about doing more, feel welcome to reach out to me. Taj, I'm sure you'll make my information available. I'm the link on the website, the email link. Network me with anyone who you think has a platform where they can reach out to athletes. I have the ambition that in the next 2 years, every retired athlete in the world will have heard about this study at least once, hopefully more like 2 or 3 times. And I think that's the only way that we make this happen. So your sharing is the way that you can help future athletes in retirement and give back, because I think anyone who really loved their sport wants to see it thrive. And that also includes seeing the success of the athletes who really commit so much to our entertainment and to the life of sport. We want to take care of people throughout the entire developmental chain, not just when they're on television.
Wow. Well, folks, you heard it here. Listeners of the show, I don't ask you guys for anything. I never try to hit you up to sell anything to you. Like Dr. Zimet said, the survey takes 23 minutes to take. This episode that you've been listening to is longer than 23 minutes. So go take the survey, share it out, reach out to Dr. Zimet. Like you said, if you think there's any other podcasts or people that you should connect with, he's a master connector. Like I said, we've had 5 people try to introduce us to each other after we've already been introduced. So just spread the message. Like we said, this is something that's very important to me. Obviously, I've been committed to this work since 2018. And to see a study like this with, very in-depth data, I think it's a beautiful thing to see it taking shape. And I know that the impact that this has the potential to have. But like Dr. Zimet said, it's only potential if we don't take action and start executing on it. So,
and we're on social media. So you'll find athletetransitionstudy.com is the website, but we're also on Instagram. Twitter is Athlete Study. So connect with us. We have marketing materials that are available on the website. A little link that will take people directly to it with an e-poster. There's a video that you can share through Twitter. I'm not a social media master myself, but I think that I've learned enough to be dangerous, and I know its value. So feel welcome. We would love to have you connect with us, and then you can receive updates about how we're doing.
Awesome. Hey, well, thank you for your time today, Dr. Zimet. Like I said, I've been looking forward to this, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing. I know people are going to get a lot out of this, and more importantly, I know that people are going to take action and actually spread the message and take the survey. So thank you for all that you do in the world. And I feel like this is a connection that you and I have made that's just really beginning, and I'm excited to see where it goes. So thank you again. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Taj. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Awesome. All right, everybody. This has been another great episode of the Thrive After Sports podcast, as well as the Power of Story with Dr. Daniel Zimet. Go to athletetransitionstudy.com. Take the survey, check all the notes, all the show notes for all the social media handles and all that good stuff. And we'll see you on the very next episode. Take care, everybody.